My name is Dr. Raj Persaud. I'm a consultant psychiatrist and I'm based in Harley Street. And I want to talk to you today a little bit about happiness and the psychology of happiness and about why happiness seems to be so elusive and whether happiness really is possible. I'm going to argue that from the latest scientific research on the psychology of happiness, actually genuine, long-standing, great happiness is entirely possible for all of us. We just need to know a little bit more about the latest psychological research findings on happiness. I want to start though by telling you a true story. Harold Macmillan, a very patrician prime minister who was running Britain in the 1960s, went to attend a very important, solemn, sombre state occasion, which was the retirement of President Charles de Gaulle, a great French leader. This was a long, sombre, important ceremonial occasion, and Harold Macmillan was representing the UK. And in the middle of this long ceremony, he found himself standing next to Madame de Gaulle, the wife of President de Gaulle. In order to pass time and make conversation during this very long ceremony, he turned to Madame de Gaulle and asked her what she was most looking forward to on the retirement of President Charles de Gaulle. This was a ceremony celebrating his retirement. Harold Macmillan, this rather patrician Prime Minister of the UK, was somewhat surprised, startled and shocked by Madame de Gaulle's answer. Because when she was asked by Harold Macmillan what she was most looking forward to after the retirement of President Charles de Gaulle, she said, a penis. Harold Macmillan was somewhat confused and disturbed by this response and turned to his right to make conversation with someone else. It was only later on reflection that he realized what Madame de Gaulle had probably been trying to say through a very heavy French accent was the word happiness. And there we have a paradox, which is that what are people really talking about when they use the word happiness? When you read a classic cod psychology article in the press about the latest research findings on happiness, because they don't define what they mean by the word happiness, the article, generally speaking, won't be that informative. So the first point is there more than one kind of happiness? And I'm going to argue that the psychological research suggests there is. And it's very important you understand there are two different kinds of happiness. And it's that important distinction that provides a clue, a doorway into the secret of happiness. But before I reveal what these two different kinds of happinesses are, I want to talk to you a little bit about Aristotle, because Aristotle has something very important to say about happiness. Aristotle is a very important, famous Greek philosopher who was very active around 400 to 500 BC. He was the personal tutor to Alexander the Great, the man who conquered all of the known world at the time. And given he was the personal tutor to the young Alexander, you might want to pay attention to what Aristotle has to say. Aristotle is a great genius also for many other achievements, for the fact that he is the man that discovers logic. Well, all those mobile phones that you carry around with you all the time, they're basically logic machines. They're small computers, and computers are based on logic. So in your mobile phone that you're carrying with you right now, you're actually carrying a little bit of Aristotle. So Aristotle has this important point to make about happiness. He says that, and these ancient Greek philosophers had this rather irritating habit of doing this, they would hang out in the marketplace, and as you rushed past them, they had this irritating habit of asking you challenging questions like, what is truth? What is justice? And this was often quite irritating to the citizens of ancient Athens, but it was the way these philosophers made a living, because if they challenged and provoked you enough, you might be impressed by their acumen and hire them to teach your kids philosophy. So Aristotle is famously said to have said one day as someone was hurrying past them, why are you hurrying past me? Where are you going? And this person said, I'm going to the Senate. And Aristotle said, why are you going to the Senate? And this person said, I'm going to make a speech. Why are you going to make a speech? You can see why these philosophers got a bit irritating. They kept with the infinite aggressor, yes, but why are you doing that? Why are you going to make a speech? Because I want to be popular. Why do you want to be popular? Because I want people to vote for me. Why do you want people to vote for you? Because I want to get elected. Why do you want to get elected? Because I want power. Why do you want power? Because I want to change the world. Why do you want to change the world? Because it will make me happy. What Aristotle is saying is whatever you're doing right now, the real reason why you're doing it, if we go through the infinite regress, is because you believe it will make you happy. Aristotle is saying the ultimate purpose of life is to be happy. The next time you're at a middle-class dinner party and having a convivial conversation with people there, why don't you try this out as a conversational gambit? Why don't you turn to the person to the right or your left and say, what do you think the ultimate purpose of life is? Feel the temperature drop in the room. This is a very important and profound question, but no one seems to want to discuss it. Aristotle's argument is you should take happiness seriously because happiness is the ultimate purpose of life. Aristotle is saying it doesn't seem to make sense in terms of when people say, I pursue power, I pursue money, I pursue sex, because you can always say, yes, but why do you pursue those things? When you get ultimately to the idea that it's going to make you happy, it doesn't seem to make sense to ask the question, why do you want to be happy? All paths lead to Rome. Whatever you start examining why you do anything, you always end up with the final point, which is that you do it because you think it will make you happy. There seems to be a sense in which money, sex, power don't seem to be ultimate goals in quite the way that happiness is. The other reason why happiness has to be the ultimate purpose of life, according to Aristotle, is again according to this anecdote as told by him. I apologize for the political incorrectness about the way he tells this story, but you've got to remember he was living between 400 to 500 BC. Aristotle says, imagine you're at a glitzy party. It's full of celebrities, famous, wealthy, gorgeous-looking supermodels, very, very famous people. And you observe a woman in the background, and you turn to your friend and you say, that woman over there is officially the most beautiful woman in the world. I've seen newspaper articles on her, they've done scientific research, and she is officially the most beautiful woman in the world. She's being snapped up by all the model agencies. Hollywood is coming calling. And your friend and you may discuss it, and one person may say, yes, I agree, I read a newspaper article about her. You're right, she is the most beautiful woman in the world, and she is stunning. But you know what I read? I read, she's not happy. Now, that may seem somewhat implausible, but it's entirely possible that it's true. You could be the most gorgeous person on the planet and still unhappy. Let's torture Aristotle's anecdote a little bit further. You're at the same glitzy party. Someone says, that man over there is the richest man on the planet. He's richer than God. He's got more money than all the rest of the world put together. And you might say, yes, I remember reading an article about him. You're quite right. He is the richest man on the world. But you know what I read? I also read, he's not happy. Aristotle says, imagine you're at the same party and you point to a man and you go, you know what, that man over there is the happiest man on the planet. I've read some newspaper articles, they've done scientific research. He is officially the happiest man on the planet. Would it make sense to say at that moment, yeah, I agree, he is the happiest man on the planet, but you know what? He's really poor. It doesn't seem to make sense. It doesn't seem to matter that he's poor if he actually is the happiest person on the planet. You could point to a woman and say, she is officially the happiest woman on the planet. Would it make sense to then say, yes, but you know what? She's no looker. It doesn't seem to matter. And that is what Aristotle is saying. Once you've achieved perfect happiness, any other deficit in your life is not relevant. However, no matter how much money you have, how much sex, how much power, how beautiful you are, there are still the possibilities that you could suffer from deficits that are meaningful and impair the quality of your life. Aristotle says happiness is the ultimate purpose of life, therefore you should take the pursuit of happiness seriously. Now, let's come back to the point that there are two different kinds of happiness. Psychological research has established there are two kinds of happiness. And being very imaginative people, psychologists have labeled these two different kinds of happiness, type 1 happiness and type 2 happiness. Type 1 happiness is the kind of happiness you experience when you drink a nice glass of wine, watch a movie, have a nice experience. And these are often sensual experiences tied to our biology, eating nice food, having sex. We are biologically programmed to enjoy type 1 happiness because it's what keeps us alive in terms of evolutionary purpose. We need to eat in order to survive, so our genes are designed to find eating a pleasurable experience. These are all type 1 happinesses. Type 2 happiness is very different. Type 2 happiness is the kind of contentment and satisfaction you feel when you contemplate the general direction your life is taking and feel some kind of pride in your achievements. Type 2 happiness is like getting a PhD thesis, finishing a difficult degree, writing a book. Type 2 happiness is usually about overcoming some kind of difficulty. A classic kind of Type 2 happiness is nursing a sick child through the night. No one enjoys nursing a sick child through the night like you might enjoy a nice glass of wine, but there is a certain satisfaction to be gained from the fact that if the child is alive the next morning, you are proud of that effect. You feel good about yourself. Type 1 happinesses are all available for purchase. If we were to go out to the West End of London this evening, we can buy all the Type 1 happinesses that exist. You can't buy Type 2 happiness in quite the same way. Yes, you could go to a dodgy website and buy a PhD, but it wouldn't give you the same satisfaction if you'd done the 5 years' work to achieve the PhD. You may be able to find a dodgy website whereby you can buy nursing a sick child through the night, but there is generally a sense in which Type 1 happiness is a happiness where you take something from the world, and Type 2 happiness is something which you give to the world. Now, notice something very important. There's a tension between Type 1 and Type 2 happiness. The more you pursue Type 1 happiness, like the warm rush of heroin through your veins, the less time and opportunity you have to pursue Type 2 happiness. The more you pursue Type 2 happiness, the more you devote yourself to that PhD thesis and don't stop to smell the roses, the less time you've got to pursue Type 1 happiness. Here is a key secret to the answer to life, the universe, and everything, and the pursuit of happiness. Have the right balance of Type 1 and Type 2 happiness in your life. If you're unhappy, it's entirely possible the balance there is awry. And to be constantly thinking when you are pursuing what you're pursuing, which happiness am I after? Is this Type 1 happiness? Is there Type 2 happiness? The average day should have a combination of Type 1 and Type 2 happinesses. One final and really important point to make is that Type 2 happiness involves unhappiness. If you wake up every morning at 5:30 to go jogging because you want to get fitter and lose weight, if you manage to do that for a year, you will derive a certain Type 2 happiness satisfaction from your achievement. When you begin doing it, it's like root canal treatment, having to get up at 5:30 in the morning. There's a certain amount of unhappiness and suffering. But it's meaningful unhappiness. It's heading towards a goal and will eventually transform into being a happiness. You will hate getting up at 5:30 in the morning to go jogging to begin with, but the more you do it, the more it transitions into something tolerable and then eventually into something enjoyable. So here's a key point. We often run away from unhappiness, but if we are doing meaningful unhappiness that leads to something, you are actually pursuing Type 2 happiness, and that is the right counterbalance for too much Type 1 happiness. One final point I want to make about the secret to life, the universe, and everything is to understand not just that there are two happinesses, there's actually intensity levels of happiness. So you can be pursuing, if we construct a crude scale between 0 and 10 is throbbing ecstasy in terms of intense happiness, and 0 is suicidal despair. If we were to do a survey of this room today, there'll be a large cluster of you experiencing mild contentment, scoring happiness at the 3, 4, or 5 levels. There'll be some of you experiencing throbbing ecstasy as I talk, hitting 9 or 10 on intense happiness, and there'll be a subgroup of you hitting 0, 1, or 2 in terms of suicidal depression, very intense unhappiness. By the way, can I just talk to the people who are experiencing throbbing ecstasy as I'm speaking right now, and can I say to them, you really need to get out more. Now, in terms of these intensity levels, what's really interesting is that if we were to survey this population again in a year's time and do a repeat of the survey, we'll find that people who were scoring 3, 4, 5, or 6 in terms of mild contentment are highly likely to be scoring 3, 4, 5, or 6 again in terms of mild contentment. In other words, mild contentment is stable. The people who are scoring 8, 9, or 10 or throbbing ecstasy are highly unlikely to be scoring 8, 9, or 10 again in a year's time. In other words, intense happiness is very unstable. So what is the secret to life, the universe, and everything, and the correct pursuit of happiness? Do not pursue intense happiness. And yet advertising, media, culture we're in encourages us all the time to pursue intense happiness. They drape a gorgeous girl over the bonnet of a BMW because they're telling you that having a BMW will lead to a certain intense experience. That's why you're going to go and buy that BMW. No one's trying to flog you a BMW because it's going to give you mild contentment. Yet, what you really should be pursuing is mild contentment. It's more stable. But it's difficult to galvanize people to pursue mild contentment. Difficult to imagine 1 million people marching in Parliament shouting, what do we want? Mild contentment. When do we want it? Well, whenever you can get round to it, really, because we're mildly content. So, to conclude, happiness is possible. Understand there's two kinds of happiness. Understand the danger of pursuing intense happiness, and you can become genuinely happy. Thank you.